Welcome to episode 7 of the Speed Secrets podcast with today's guest, Colin Braun. Get ready to listen to a very cool conversation I have with one of the very best pro racers in the world as we talk left foot braking, trail braking, the cornering line, and what the very best drivers do that most don't. Hey, a small warning though, the audio quality is not perfect, but it's not bad, and you'll love what Colin has to say and how it can help you.
Welcome to the Speed Secrets podcast. Join Ross Bentley and guests, drivers, instructors and coaches, engineers, officials, and others for conversations about high performance and race driving. Listen for tips and advice, thought-provoking ideas, and inspiration to take your own driving to the next level. Green, green, green!
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. This is going to be fun. Well, at least for me anyway, because we've got somebody that I started working with. I was very, very fortunate to start working with when he was about 12 years old, and I've watched him go from being the youngest driver in North America to ever win a professional road race, winning in NASCAR Trucks, driving for Roush Racing, to dominating in sports car racing, particularly in the Prototype Challenge Series, driving for CORE Autosports. I could go on and on about all the races and championships he's won, but we don't want his head to get too big, and we don't have time for that anyway. So today's guest is Colin Braun, or is that Colin Braun?
That's a good question. First off, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting. And, secondly, the name, that's a tough one. That's been one that has tripped up a lot of people. I'll, from time to time, call someone I haven't talked to in a while, and I'll be like, hey, it's Colin Braun calling. And they kind of go, hey, how are you? And then I kind of realize they're not sure who I am. So I'll say, hey, Colin Braun calling. And they go, oh, you should have said so. Why didn't you? So either or works, but, I don't care. Whatever.
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes I'll mention you and they're going, Colin Braun. I don't know Brown. I know a Braun. Yeah. So, okay. So now that we know who you are, as you know, I mean, I go to a lot of different events, car club, HPDE events, track days, club races, pro races. And one of the things that I'm constantly asked by drivers is, what's the difference? What is it that the best drivers do that the others don't? And that's kind of what I'd like to talk about. Some real technique kind of skill kind of things about what the best are doing. So are you willing to share your secrets?
Well, the good part is I think you've taught me most of my secrets. So in a way, you kind of already have all of my secrets. So, it was great working with you for the last 15, 16 years, and certainly a huge part of my success and my understanding of the sport and the technique and how to be fast. There's a lot to the equation for sure. So it's always fun dissecting it down with you.
So, if I just walked up and said, okay, so what is it? What is your answer to that question? What is it that the best drivers do that the others don't? And let's keep this focused on technique here, like not the kind of the approach or the mental part of it, but, do they steer with their nose, turn the steering wheel with their nose, or what is it that the best do?
Well, I think in a quick on the surface answer, I think it's primarily what drivers do from the time that they kind of get to the middle of the brake zone until the time they get to the apex of the corner. I've worked with a lot of people as well, coaching people, and, looked at a lot of different co-drivers' data and really tried to understand what makes drivers fast and different. And we've had this discussion ever since the time I was a little kid. And to me, everyone can sort of drive off of the corner pretty fast. Even if you're relatively inexperienced, the ability to put the throttle pedal down, feel the car at the limit coming off the corner, and modulate the throttle and work the steering coming off the corner is somewhat of the easiest part of the whole technique of driving, in my opinion. It's the easiest to feel, the easiest to catch. And then I think finding that brake zone is probably the next most difficult thing. But I think really what differentiates people is what they do in the center of the corner in terms of getting the car rotated, getting the car slowed down, using the brake pedal to help not only slow the car down, but to help rotate and turn the car, and the timing of all of the release of the brake, the turn of the steering wheel to different degrees and how much, and balancing all that in the middle of the corner, that is really what separates good drivers from great drivers to newbies. I mean, I think that's really the area that is the differentiator.
So it reminds me of that Mark Donohue quote where he said that exiting a corner with the car on the limit is like tightrope walking, but entering a corner and having the car on the limit on the entry of the corner is like tightrope walking blindfolded, or jumping onto a tightrope blindfolded. And it's like, that's exactly what you just said, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the exit part to me is not so hard, and to a lot of people, I don't think. I mean, that's, relatively not scary. The consequences are a small spin on the exit, and as long as you have a good connection to your throttle foot, you're able to modulate the throttle and use the steering wheel to keep the car going straight. So, yeah, it's a great analogy by Mark for sure.
And I guess, it's once you're in the corner, you kind of know what you got.
Absolutely. And for me, it's where, when we go out in the rain in a car, that's one of the areas where it's easy for me to experiment. Center off of the corner, how much grip I have, how quickly does the tire in the rain break traction, those sort of things. They give me a great sense of, wow, this car has a lot of grip, a little grip, this tire has good grip or not good grip. And then that helps me set how I charge the next corner because of the grip that I felt like I had coming off of the prior corner. So, for me, it's a great indicator of how much grip I have, but it's the easiest place to feel that with the least risk of a consequence, in my opinion.
I guess that's that's the key is you kind of calibrate yourself to how much grip you've got coming off the corner, and then that tells you, okay, I got that much grip, so I can go and use that on the entry of the next one. Because I think that's the area that a lot of people go, well, how do I know how fast I can go into that corner? Well, you calibrate from the previous thing, right?
Yeah, and I think that's all experience in a way, right? You've got to have enough experience to be able to calibrate to, wow, a lot of grip, or wow, not very much grip. And it was the same thing for me. I started a couple years ago for fun doing some motorcycle track day riding. And while it's very similar to car racing in many ways, it's very different in other ways. And, I kept trying to understand how much entry speed I could carry without having the front tire slide and low side and fall over. And I quickly realized that it's a lot easier to carry too much speed in a race car. You just slide past the apex a little bit. You don't have to worry about tucking the front under. And, I started to talk to those guys, and they said the same thing. Well, you kind of calibrate how much grip you have center off of the last corner. And I'm thinking to myself, as a newbie motorcycle rider, this is probably the same thing when I tell people this on a car. They go, I don't even understand how to do that. I'm a newbie car racer, and it doesn't make sense to calibrate anything. So it's hard. It's easy to talk about when you're good at, but I think harder to apply sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I mean, how do you relate this to a driver that's relatively new, doing some of this first track days, that kind of stuff? Do you say, okay, well, just, stove it into the corner. If the car runs a little wide of the apex, collect it and carry on, right? How's that for advice?
Yeah, I think that's decent advice, probably if the guy has some deep pockets and is able to fix his car. But, yeah. I think it's one of those things. I think secondly, in sort of the topic of what separates good drivers from newer drivers, from great drivers, I think the other big thing, in my opinion, is the awareness that you have of what you're doing. I think great drivers are able to be aware enough and go, wow, I broke, 2 feet later than I did the lap before and carried just a bit too much entry speed. I need to back my braking up a little bit. And we're so calibrated and so sensitive to those things that we're able to adjust ever so slightly our entry speeds and calibrate based off the last corner exit. Okay, next time I need to get to the throttle this much sooner. And, I think for drivers that are newer in their first track days, it's a challenge to really be aware enough to go, okay, I'm going to brake 20 feet later, because you're holding on for dear life, driving at the edge of, your capability, having a blast, but there's not a whole lot of other mental room, I don't think, for going, oh, there's where I broke last time. Now I brake here. I mean, by that time, you're past the apex and into the tire wall on the other side. So, I think those two areas are the biggest places to focus on, is making sure you're really aware of what you're doing and what's going on. And then when you're aware enough, then you can use kind of that center off feeling that you get from the car to help, kind of calibrate yourself to your braking markers, to on throttle points and those kind of things.
So how does one practice this awareness part? I'm just sitting here going, if I'm a relatively new driver, that's going to be my question. Is like, well, okay, that sounds great. And obviously, one of the things I do when I'm coaching is I help drivers become more aware. But, if I'm the guy out there all by myself at a track day, I'm going, well, okay, that sounds all great, but how do I actually do that?
Right.
Did you practice that?
That's tough. I think one of the things, we've used it and you used it with me back, when I was first getting into car racing, because it's so different than the go-kart racing I was used to. And, I think sitting down with the track map and sort of laying out where you're braking, like pick some good real reference points. And that makes you start to think about where you're braking in each corner, where your turn-in point is, where your apex point is. And I think once you start to break down and think about it, when you're out of the car, that awareness and that sensitivity just kind of becomes a bit more natural, because you're able to, really, really understand it in peace when you're sitting in the pits, and then you go out on the racetrack and go, oh yeah, that was my break point. Okay, I need to move that up 20 feet. That's now going to be the second cone and not the third cone. And, I think until you start to think and really work at the skill of being a better race car driver, you can't wish it to happen. You've got to put the work in to try to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think asking those questions, where am I braking, that kind of stuff. I mean, I have this conversation with drivers all the time around just ask yourself more questions. Not the questions of why am I so stupid and why did I brake so early, but where did I brake now? What would happen if I brake 20 feet later? What would happen if I brake 2 car lengths later? That kind of thing. That certainly helps build that awareness.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I've had some of the biggest light bulb moments in my driving career, I think, from having those kind of conversations with you. I'm fortunate enough where, I can have those conversations with myself. And then when I get stumped or want the actual answer, I'm able to call you and we can talk about it. And, it's neat to sort of bounce those conversations back and forth. And you end up having those kind of epiphany moments. And like you said, I think many drivers can sort of do that in their own heads and unlock a lot of answers. And,
a lot of people look at you and go, yeah, your dad, one of the best race engineers in the world. And I think, one of the reasons why your dad, Jeff, is such a great race engineer is he asks better questions. So, he's probably trained you all your life asking you questions and making you think about those things, right? So,
yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's, you have to be aware enough in this sport on many levels, but, you have to be, to me, the first step of being a better driver is being aware of what you're doing. If I've talked to some people that go out and they go out and they have a fun time and they did their first track day and we all go through it. You're so overwhelmed with everything that you can't be aware. So once you get to the point where you're aware enough to know, hey, I'm braking here. Hey, I'm doing this. I'm feeling that. Then that's when you can start to really break down your driving, ask those questions, and start to improve. And until you've gotten to that level, I think you just got to keep having some fun and making some laps until you're able to to be aware enough to start cracking the code.
And that's cool that you went off and did the motorcycle stuff. Did you have some overwhelming moments where you're like, oh, there's too much going on here?
I did. I had a lot of overwhelming moments, and I think probably one of the biggest overwhelming moments that I had was I was following another rider, and he ended up tucking the front tire down, fell off of his bike, and I've been through a lot of different sort of crash scenarios where people crash in front of you and you're trying to avoid the car or a piece of debris or something like that. And I've done it in NASCAR, I've done it in sports cars, so I was like, kept my cool, not a big deal. But I didn't realize until I thought about it and saw it happen on a motorcycle. When somebody crashes, quickly it becomes two big objects you have to avoid: the rider himself and then the rider's bike. So that panicked me a little bit because I didn't know what to expect. I was expecting one thing sliding on the road, and then quickly it went to two things sliding on the road. And I was like, okay, if I have to hit one, do I hit the guy or do I hit his bike? I probably should hit his bike. I don't know where does a rider slide? I know the bike's going to go this way, but this guy's got arms and legs flailing. He could go anywhere. So that quickly made me realize, wow, this is very different, and that was a little sketchy.
So have you been down yet? Have you?
I have not, and I kind of hung my helmet up. I got to the point where I was decently quick and knew that inevitably I was going to end up wiping out, and nobody wants to hire a race car driver with a broken collarbone or arm, so probably better off to call it a day.
Huh. Yeah, you're
mature. Yeah. I like to think mature.
You're smart there. Okay. Yeah. So let's go back to the braking stuff. And I mean, you're a guy you've left foot braked since you were, what, 4? And I was there the very first time that you right foot braked. That was pretty fun, prepping to do Daytona in that Porsche. And I can remember saying, okay, now you're going to have to brake with your right foot. And you're like, what? And
how does that even work? Tell me how this works. Yeah, that was great. That was great.
So you're a long-time left foot braker, but I also know that, I mean, I did a chump car race in a Miata with you last year, and I know you're right foot braking that thing. And so you can switch back and forth. Obviously, you have a preference for left foot braking.
Yeah, I definitely have a preference for left foot braking. I think, again, it goes back to what I'm used to, what I did, what I grew up doing. I'm very sensitive with my left foot, and I feel like I'm able to really modulate the brake pedal near the apex and help the car have the balance that I want it to have. And I can do it with my right foot, but just not as sensitively and, not with the precision that I feel like I can with my left foot. And, I'm one of these guys that, is a huge advocate of how effective and how much the brake pedal can do as you sort of turn off into the corner. And, I think there's, going back to kind of our first topic was, the difference of new drivers versus more experienced guys, and good guys versus great guys. And I think that middle of the corner phase is where, there's a huge amount of potential speed in it. So I'm a big proponent of left foot braking.
So do you think everybody should left foot brake? Because, I mean, you talk about you've got great sensitivity with your left foot. And, it was interesting. Just recently, I posted something on my Driver Coach Speed Secrets Facebook page and asked the question, what's something that you've done in a car that hasn't worked? And, out of, 33 comments, I think 28 of them were left foot braking. And, because I think everybody goes, I started using my left foot on the brake, and of course they don't have that sensitivity. So, what do you tell somebody like that?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that's something, it's obviously very preferential. Each driver is going to have his own preference. I think, and we've had this discussion before, I think on paper, if you have the best right foot braker versus the best left foot braker, I think there's got to be some case to be made for the left foot braker going to be a little bit quicker, because you just simply don't have that delay of off the throttle, moving your foot onto the brake. The left foot braker can instantly do that. So let's say we're both the same on the brakes the rest of the way into the corner. We're both able to modulate it really, really well. I think by the math of the equation, you'd have to be quicker left foot braking if you're both pinnacle brakers. But, I think a lot of these come down to what you're more comfortable with and what you've done for longer and the type of car you're in. I mean, in many modern cars today, they're very set up for left foot braking, and it almost becomes hard to be a right foot braker, in some of these new modern day cars, and vice versa. When I go back and drive my Miata chump car, I don't have a choice. I've got a right foot brake. So, I think depending on what type of car you're in and how comfortable you are doing it, I think you're better to do what you're more comfortable with, to be honest. I think if you're a great right foot braker and you feel comfortable with that, I don't think there's a whole lot of point of swapping your technique over and trying to relearn something new, because unless you're going to, really commit to it and become just unbelievable at it, I think you are going to find out it's not as good as where you were with your right foot, and it takes a long time to build that experience and confidence.
Yeah, obviously we've talked about this, and I agree. I mean, all things being equal, a left foot braker will be faster than a right foot braker. We've also talked about the, as a right foot braker that moved and did some left foot braking. I'm probably better as a right foot braker, but I can be pretty quick with a left foot. But one thing I do know, and I've seen it myself, or I've experienced it myself, and I've seen some of the very, very best right foot brakers do this, is in that quick movement from coming off the throttle and going to the brake pedal, they catch their foot on the side of the pedal, and they don't get on the brakes in the right way, and they find themselves stuffed into a tire wall at the end of the corner. So I think there's almost a margin for error if you left foot brake, because your foot's right there and it's ready to go, right?
Yeah, I think that you have a little bit of an advantage with that. You never have to search for the brake pedal, so to speak. But at the same time, I think it's one of those things, and you probably can fill in more details on how do you make that transition over from a right or a left foot braker to do the other. I mean, I had to do it in reverse. You had to teach me how to be comfortable enough using my right foot to brake, because I'd never done it before.
Well, the advantage there is, hey, your right foot's been using the throttle your entire life, and it's been, everybody has sensitivity with their right foot because they're using the throttle with it, and they get good at modulating the pedal. If your left foot has only ever used the clutch pedal, it kind of has one program, right? Bam, bam. And that's not very good for the brake pedal often. So,
right.
So I think, the bottom line is, if you're going to left foot brake, you're going to need to spend an awful lot of time practicing it. And, then you get into, well, how much of that can you practice on the street? There's a couple other things. Actually, this post I put on Facebook and some of the comments I heard were fantastic. I mean, a couple people posted, I think, was, the one advantage with right foot braking is, in a car that doesn't have really great, a 6-point harness to hold you in place, you rely on that left foot over the dead pedal to support your body. And if you are, held in with a 3-point harness, like a stock harness in a street car, and you're trying to left foot brake, and your foot's over the right foot's over the throttle, you have possibility of your whole body kind of sliding forward. Now you're not using the pedals properly. So there are pros and cons arguments to, for and against the left foot braking. But and then there's one other factor here, and you touched on it, is if you just want to learn it. I mean, I know some drivers who have been tracking, they've been doing track days for 23 years, and they go, you know what? I just want to left foot brake. I want a new challenge in my driving, and I think that's fantastic. I think that's what a great thing just to add to your driving experience is, I can left foot brake now too, and I get better at that.
Well, and I think for a driver, that has aspirations of doing more in the sport, maybe than just some track days, the ability to be sort of ambidextrous, I like to say, and do either or, is pretty advantageous. I mean, like I said, I drive many cars that are set up for kind of only left foot braking, but I've also driven some pretty fast cars. A 458 Ferrari Challenge car is really set up to be right foot broke. And so when I drive those for people, I have to right foot brake them. So, to be able to flip flop, I think is something that can come in handy for sure.
Yeah. And obviously, we've touched on this, and if you go to if you go to a track day event, the number one topic that's talked about is the line. Everybody spends, hours and hours and hours like, well, I think the apex is there. Well, no, I think it's there. And I think you should turn in here. There's a ton of talk around the line. And I think you and I are kind of on the same page of hey, the car's going to tell you where the line is. So don't get too caught up. And I mean, hey, it's important. But I think the second topic that comes up a lot is to trail brake or not to trail brake. So just your thoughts.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think the line one, certainly my thoughts there is, I can tell you on a IMSA weekend where you've got, 2, 3, 4, pro level drivers in the car driving at a place like Daytona. I think we talk about the line, so to speak, hardly ever. I mean, I've driven now with CORE Autosport and IMSA for the last 5 years. This will be my 6th year. And I bet in total of my time being there, we've talked about the line, so to speak, for probably under 20 minutes between all 5 seasons. I mean, it's just something that you don't talk a lot about. We talk more about the technique and how we drive and what the car's doing and how it's affected by what we do with the inputs a lot more than we do talk about this turn-in point and this apex point and those sort of things. I think when you do the technique right, as you said, the line sort of takes care of itself. And the line is going to be, to some degree, what the line's going to be. I mean, I've been fortunate enough this year to do some global rallycross events, and those are, tracks basically set up in a parking lot with barriers. And when you first show up and get there, it's just, there is no line. It's just a parking lot. And pretty soon after some cars run, whether it's the proper textbook line or not, there is absolutely a groove that has the rubber in it and that has way more grip than anywhere else. And quite quickly, the line becomes where the rubber is, and you don't really get to pick what the line is. It just kind of is what it is. So I think many of the tracks that we all go to, I'm sure doing track days, have pretty established marks and sort of rubber grooves that are the line. I mean, you don't have a lot of options. It's not like you're going to sit there and reinvent the wheel. And, sure, you may be better. You may be right that textbook, the line should be through this corner of very late apex because it leads onto a long straightaway or whatever, all these reasons. But, if the grip is not there to support it, and it doesn't matter if you're correct mathematically and textbook, it matters, if you can get through the corner well and carry good speed and get to the throttle early and all those kind of things.
You've driven tons of different cars, and a few years ago, you drove a front-wheel drive car in. Did you drive
World Challenge? I drove a Kia in World Challenge.
Yeah. So you've driven front-wheel drive. So one of the things, I hear a lot of is drivers go, well, okay, that's the line for a Porsche. Well, that's the line for a front-wheel drive car. Well, that's the car, the line for a Mustang, What's your experience?
I think that's funny. That's, yeah, I mean, I've never, I've driven all kinds of different cars, prototype cars, GT cars, stock cars. I think I've been fortunate enough at a place like Road Atlanta to drive, a NASCAR Sprint Cup car. I've driven, prototype challenge cars, Daytona prototypes, GTLM cars, GTD cars, Porsche, Cup cars, Ferrari challenge cars. I mean, you name it. And I don't think I've ever felt like, oh, the line in this specific car is different than that specific car. Again, I think it's more about doing the inputs and technique differently for each car, but the line just takes care of itself. I totally agree. I think too many people spend so much time, they get their heads wrapped up so much in the line that if they thought about the technique and what they were doing with the steering wheel and when they turned in, and, not to be mean, but again, it goes back to some of the awareness stuff, right? If you're not, ready to even be aware of where the apex is, you don't need to spend much time on figuring out what the line is, right? You got to start, the building blocks have to be built a good foundation, up.
Yeah, and same experience here is that, I don't think the line varies as much as some people think it does. Just drive the car and, like you said, focus on, the right techniques, and you'll be in the right place in the track.
Well, I mean, it's a good, quick little story, but tell people, how you've always taught me how to learn a new track, right? I mean, we go to some street courses we haven't been to. You go to some place overseas maybe that I haven't been to, and I would always ask Ross, hey, tell me how you would learn a new track, because I'm not going to get a lot of laps. I'm going to Le Mans for my first time, and I'm only going to get maybe 10 laps at the pre-test. How am I going to learn a huge, big, long track like Le Mans in 10 laps? So go with that answer.
Well, yeah, and obviously there's all the prep stuff, and Peter Crouse and I did a podcast about the that whole process of prepping and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, it comes down, just drive the car to its limits, and it'll tell you where to be.
And I think that sentence is what stuck with me, and that's what I always use whenever I learn a new track is, exactly what you've said. Drive the car to the limit, and it will find the line, basically.
Yeah.
And as long as the car's at the limit, it's you're going to be on the right line, and you keep adjusting your technique and inputs until you feel like, oh, that's the limit, and then you've got the line. So I think that's the biggest key.
And I think that can apply to somebody that says, hey, well, you know what? I'm just doing track day stuff for fun. I don't want to drive at the limit. I want to drive at 7/10 or 8/10 or something like that. I think you can drive at 7 or 8/10 and it will still tell you where to be, as long as you're driving at 7 or 8/10 all the time. If you come into the corner and you overslow the car because you're not aware of the brake points and the stuff that you've talked about, and you're at 5/10 entering the corner, and then halfway through the corner you stomp on the throttle and you're at 9 or 10 or maybe even 10.5/10 exiting the corner, that's when I think you struggle with the line. So I think if you really focus on the technique and driving the car to its consistent limit of whatever limit it is you choose to drive it. If it's 8/10 because you want to keep a margin for error because you want to drive the car home at the end of the day for sure, then it'll tell you where the line is, right?
Absolutely. And, I would say my other pet peeve is so many times you see people that are driving down the middle of the racetrack. I can tell you pretty much anywhere I've ever been, there's certainly the transition point where you may transition from the one side to the other side of the track down a straightaway. But the line is never, in my experience, the middle of the racetrack, and then you turn in either to the left or to the right. That's definitely not it.
It's so funny when I did that chump car race with you in the Miata Road Atlanta last year. The start of the race happens. I wander down to turn one just to kind of watch this thing, and I'm amazed at how many people are driving around the middle of the track. Like, that's interesting. So it was kind of fun to see that. Yeah. But obviously
that's not the answer.
That's not the right line. Yes. Yeah. That's not the way to drive. But, some of those people were brand spanking new to driving on the track. And what's really cool is by, later in the race, they start to figure it out. So it's fantastic that they have that kind of a, those kinds of racing, that kind of racing that's out there now so that people can go and get that experience. So now, okay, we've kind of dug into the braking part of it and all that part of it. Anything special with the throttle? Just stomp on it?
Well, I think, the throttle part's the easy part, right? I mean, everybody, I live down a bit of a country road down here, and my neighbor down the road has a little souped up, whatever, Miata or something like that. And he comes out of his driveway every day, leaving these nice black marks all the way out to the edge of the road. So, I don't think he's any professional race car driver, but, I think that's the easier part. People are naturally kind of skilled, I think, when it comes to feeling on the throttle, how to kind of track the car out to the exit. So, certainly some cars don't have enough power and you can just stomp down on the throttle on the exit. Is it ultimately the quickest, most efficient way to get lap time? Certainly not. But, I think for people just starting, it's definitely an approach, you can take and then kind of whittle away from there. I just think that's the easiest part of the whole bit of driving is on throttle on the exit.
I don't know if you've heard this, but you're barely old enough for this, but Aryton Senna,
Right.
He was famous for the way he applied throttle. He'd come out of the throttle and it was almost like step, like whap, 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 off, coming off the corner in a car. And, to me, that doesn't make any sense. Have you ever tried that approach?
Yeah, no, I have not. I mean, I've never really tried that approach. I think fundamentally, maybe because I was raised by a race car engineer who beat into my head, it's all about the platform. And certainly as we get into cars with, more aero dependency and downforce, it's very important. But even heavy stock cars that transfer a lot of weight, you've really got to be mindful of what you do with the pedals and how you move the weight around. And, I don't understand on paper how you could do that and obviously make it work. I mean, he did, obviously, but I've never been able to do it.
Right. Well, sometimes I think people look at superstars and go, well, they did that, so I should do that. And then sometimes you look at it and you go, but what if he was smoother? Maybe he would have been even better. So
it's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah. I kind of want to wrap this up pretty quick here because, try to keep these things relatively short. And, obviously we need to have this conversation some more. I know, we tried to record a show at Daytona at the track, and we're going to try that again because it's just cool to have race car sounds in the background. But, we'll do some more of this. But any last things you'd just say, somebody going to the track, whether it's a club racer, a pro racer, a track day guy, just technique kind of wise, other than the.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, my biggest thing is that whole brake pedal and using the brake pedal to the apex. Whether you're right foot braking or left foot braking, I think thinking about how you use the pedal, how you start to squeeze onto the pedal, or if you attack the pedal really abruptly, what it does to the feel of the car. Does it really transfer a lot of weight to the front, and does that help your car turn or not turn? Quickly you'll realize whether you want to be trail braking in your kind of car or not trail braking. But I think there's so much to be gained or lost by what you do with the brake pedal. And, far too often, I think people get wrapped up with, where do they put the brakes on? Tell me where the brake marker is. And, I'm one of these guys that likes to go the other way. And a lot of it's because of what you've taught me. But, where is your end of brake point, or where do you get off the brakes? At what point do you want to be done and transitioning from slowing down to letting the car take a little bit of a set in the center of the corner and getting back to the throttle? And, I think far too often people will go, wow, I got to brake 100 feet deeper. I am so far out to lunch. But they forget the fact that they also need to look at where they release the brake pedal. If you have stuck in your head that you're not going to trail brake, and maybe you should be trail braking in your car, you can end up being the best braker in the world, and you're never going to be able to move that 100 feet deeper because of the fact you're not using all of the available braking distance. If you're making sure to not trail brake, you're maybe giving up 50 feet of potential braking distance that you could have. And I drive a lot of people's cars, and then coach them, and they'll drive their cars. And one of the things that across the board we seem to always work on is obviously braking a little bit deeper. And on the surface, when you quickly look through the data, that's the most obvious thing. But when you really peel it back, it's finding that end of brake point and making sure you're maximizing all the distance you have available to you to get the car slowed down.
And I think the cool thing is that you end up using the brakes not just to slow the car down, but you use the brakes as a tool to get back to full throttle sooner. Because if you get the end of the braking point right, the car is just lined up, and you are literally almost stomping on the throttle at that point, right? I mean, I'm not going to give away all your secrets, but your throttle traces are pretty aggressive, and it's because of what you do with the brakes, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's that fine balance point with all cars, and they're all a bit different, I think. But if you can use the brake pedal to help make front grip as you get down to, that last little bit by the apex, and have the timing right where you're still carrying a little bit of brake pedal pressure, and then it helps the car do that last little bit of rotation, and then you're squeezing back to full throttle really abruptly and quickly, you get really good corner exits that way. And all cars are different, and they all require a little bit different technique. But, generally, I'm a fan, I would say, of trail braking most modern day kind of cars. I think it's quicker. I think there's more speed in it. And, when I say trail brake, you may be trail braking only ever so slightly to the apex, but just keeping the nose loaded, making that little bit of extra front grip can be the difference, between getting the car turned and you're able to get back to the throttle ever so slightly earlier and not. And, it doesn't mean you're carrying all this brake pressure down to the apex, certainly, but a little bit of brake pressure, I think, is a key to helping the thing turn.
That's very cool. So what's the best way for people to follow you? I mean, website, Twitter, what is it?
Yeah, I've got a bit of both. My website is just my name, Colin Braun or Braun.com. And the same with Twitter. I'm just, at Colin Braun, either one. On both Twitter and Instagram, and just love interacting with people, and it's fun getting to talk about the sport that I love, and always fun to break down techniques, with the master Ross, for sure.
Well, I always say I've learned more from you. You've been my lab rat. I've been able to try so many things with you. So thanks for doing that. So. So I'll put your website and Instagram and Twitter stuff in the show notes so people can follow you. And I know you do a lot of stuff, sharing stuff. So and getting out there and coaching and helping people. So keep doing that. And what is it that we always tell every driver?
Pressure's on. Have fun, maybe?
Have fun. That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Have fun.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was worried, but I thought it was have fun.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Colin. Okay, time for another speed secret. Here's today's tip. It's not where you begin to apply the throttle that counts. It's when you get to 100% full throttle that makes the difference. I've heard many drivers claim they got to throttle sooner than a competitor, but can't understand why they're slower on the straightaway. Of course, they blame the engine, but that's not always the problem. The real problem is they begin applying the throttle so soon that they need to then hesitate before they're able to get to full throttle. If they had only waited just a fraction of a second to allow the car to rotate enough around the corner, they would then be able to quickly squeeze back to full throttle sooner. In other words, they'd get to 100% full throttle sooner than the driver who dipped into the throttle part way. So focus on where you get to 100% full throttle and not where you just begin to apply the throttle. If you'd like more tips, advice, and resources, check out my website at speedsecrets.com. I have all sorts of free tips and ebooks available there. Also, if you like this podcast and would like to get driving tips every week by email, go to speedsecretsweekly.com to subscribe to my e-newsletter. Okay, that's it for this week. Speak to you next week. Keep learning and having fun.